evening. Thanks for joining us here on the Sunday edition of the Urban Debate. I am Afrida Rahman Ali. Well, today we are going to look at the very important issue of online education, where what we know as of now are some startling facts that has come to us through a report submitted by the Parliamentary Standing Committee in Parliament that has assessed the online education as a viable option vis-a-vis classroom learning, and has also opined on a plan that can come into action to reopen schools. What are the stumbling blocks there? Is it possible to immediately think of reopening schools without waiting for the vaccination process of children to be completed? Total closure of educational institutions in this country because of the pandemic has affected 24 crore school children in India. This is not a small number, and I'll give you perspectives on why we have to talk about the quantum of this problem. It is huge. It is found through this report. Again, we know now that less than 12% of schools in India has internet facilities. So where does that leave the 88% of schools in India and the children enrolled there? Therefore, it is important to look at how far we have gone with this whole option of online education. 70% of the country does not have access to internet, and the available quality of connectivity is also poor, which effectively means that the poor and the marginal in rural areas, the laborers, the migrant workers and their children have been completely deprived of the benefits of online learning. So this report has made some important observations which we are going to discuss over the next half an hour. But the most important point that it makes in no unequivocal terms is that online education is not real education. It has come to that conclusion based on a number of aspects. Now, what the report essentially says is that this entire process has been excruciating for parents, teachers and students alike. For parents, of course, besides the burden of paying school fees despite job losses, etc., to take the responsibility of ensuring that the younger children attend online classes, to facilitate that, to enable that, has been no mean task. It has been a huge responsibility. For teachers to hold the students' attention through an online class, especially again the younger ones, to make sure that the children do not lose focus, again has been a monumental task, because it robs the whole experience of that human presence, of that teaching learning experience, which is very essential, as it turns out, in imparting knowledge. A device actually creates another artificial barrier, which for a lot of students have not worked. Even for those privileged ones who have access to the devices, it has not been a very fruitful experience, as per this report that now points out that the prolonged period of online education over a year now has actually meant physical, emotional and health challenges for all the stakeholders involved. So under circumstances, there are two issues now. One, of course, is that should we then now look at a systematic, calibrated, staggered approach in opening schools in this country, because there seems to be no other option. Online education, as per this detailed study done, is not working for bulk of the students of this country. It has only increased the divide. The second option, of course, the other opinion also, is that this is a new discovery. Remote learning is here to stay. It can be harnessed to the advantage of students as well. It can be a great leveler. It can make education accessible in the remotest parts of this country. So why not use this opportunity to develop it, and instead of shunning it right away? So I'm going to bring in expert opinion on this topic. Let me welcome Gurumurthy Kasinathan, academician and director of IT for Change, also member of the National Coalition on the Education Emergency. Welcome, Mr. Kasinathan. Kiran Devtia, child behavioral psychologist, also with us. Kiran ji, thank you for joining us. Welcome. Priyanka Gulati, Principal, Evergreen Public School, Vasundhara Enclave in Delhi. Thank you so much, Priyanka Gulati, for joining us on Mirror Now. I want to first go across to actually Gurumurthy Kasinathan to ask this very basic question that you know, this report actually throws at us. It technically tells us that online education is no real education, even to that limited extent where we have replaced the classroom learning with digital learning. Even in that limited extent, it has not worked for our students. At best, it can be a stopgap arrangement. We need to go back to our traditional method ASAP. Where do you stand on this, Mr. Gurumurthy? Mr. Gurmurthy, you'll have to unmute yourself. I'm not able to hear you. I think you need to unmute.
You're able to hear me now? I wanted to say that the Parliament Committee report is bang
Yes.
on dot because internet access is a very serious issue in the country today, and several studies have said maybe less than 10% of the students actually have effective access. Now, the term effective access is important to understand. Simply because there is a mobile phone in the family with the connectivity doesn't mean the child can access education, because the process of teaching learning requires very high bandwidth, consistent bandwidth for a long period of time. I would say less than 10% have access to it. Secondly, and equally importantly, pedagogically, it's proven that children, particularly young children, can only learn in a group where physical interaction is the most important requirement, both with fellow students as well as with the teacher. Both on technology access grounds as well as pedagogical grounds, it's very clear that I agree with the phrase, online education is not education. At the most, we can look at it as some kind of a band-aid solution. When there is heavy bleeding, you're still trying to use a band-aid because nothing else is available. You might still use it. But I think it's band-aid on a gaping wound. And therefore, the solution really is schools have to open. Nobody is arguing that all schools should open immediately and it should go back to how it was in February 2020. But staggered opening, phased opening, different kinds of arrangements can be done. And it's also proven that child fatalities, child casualties, child cases are extremely low, very negligible. So in the context of low harm from opening schools and high harm from keeping schools closed, I think it's a no-brainer that schools must be open. We must remember that it's not only the learning loss, it's also the fact that child labor has increased, child nutrition has suffered more, early marriages among girls are becoming more common, and we are going to see a very huge school dropout. So given all these requirements, given all these challenges, I completely agree with the parliamentary report that schools must open immediately.
Yes, you're very right in making that point, which the report also highlights, by the way. It says that the pandemic-induced lockdown might have reduced the earning capacity of many households, resulting in children being pushed to the labor market. It says young girls are being pushed into marriage instead of education. It also warns against permanent dropouts. Now, for a country with anyway, poor penetration of education, we cannot afford to have permanent dropouts, learning, nutrition, in fact, and mental health. All of these issues are pointed out. And so coming to that point on emotional well-being, Ms. Kiran Tevtia, as a child behavioral psychologist, what are we in for? I mean, in real terms, how would you describe this when we talk about children for such a prolonged period being in the confines of their homes, being deprived of school, which is such an essential part of growing up years? What does it translate into, and how is it going to affect their emotional well-being, ma'am?
Right. So, Afrida, I see here that the report talks from the poor, the rural, and marginalized section of the society. However, I would, in general, say that even if the children are getting an opportunity in preschool, in primary, or in secondary to be part of the ongoing online education, even there a big segment has been affected. And because it's a social emotional learning which happens in a school setup. So we have to understand that a 5-year-old child, right, when the child is writing something in the notebook, okay, and then the child sees her friend also writing in the notebook, they learn from just observing that another person, what is he or she writing, not just what the teacher is saying. And this is what is missing in this. So, and then of course, there's another challenge which comes, especially which I see from the parents' point of view, that the owners, even for the places where the online education is going on, especially in the primary and the pre-primary section, I see a lot of reports where there is focus going on in 10th standard and 12th standard. But I would, if you ask me, I would suggest is the pre-primary and the primary section which is really affected. Firstly, because offices have opened, so the onus comes on one of the parents to sit with the child. Secondly, I see a lot of mothers who are actually dropping out of their workforce because they have to help. So overall, it is increasing the anxiety in the house, and overall, it is affecting the child in a lot of many other sectors, especially the younger one, I would say.
Yes. Right, the younger ones always a bigger challenge. I agree, as a parent also, of course. But Ms. Priyanka Gulati, if I can come to you, you're a school principal and you deal with students together in a classroom, so you know the difference perhaps more than better than anyone else. But then let me play the devil's advocate for a change, because it is also said that these children are millennial kids. They are very different from what we used to be. These are all kids born after 2010, or at least in the 2000s. And therefore, they are the digital natives. They are used to operating out of tablets. They are used to computer screens. And for them, it is not as big a deal as we are making it out to be. Do you agree with that point of view? Or are you more with the other panelists here who believe that online education, there's only so much you can achieve with it. Beyond that, it's not yielding much?
I do agree with other panelists. That the thing is this, that yes, they are digital millennium kids and they really know how to use devices. Like my pre-primary students, now they are well equipped with the their equipments, and they really don't need, many of them don't need their mothers to sit along with them. I'm talking about pre-primary kids. But at the same time, I very much agree with other panelists also. That online education has its own limitations. It is when we talk about a content taught through the, maybe when content is taught through online mode, could be relevant. It could be relevant. But the class devoid of reflection and review may not basically plant a seed for critical and deep thinking, which could be the trajectory, which basically makes us, the skills makes a trajectory of their life. So that's where I personally feel online education has its own limitations, and I am for offline school, whatever we can.
Okay,
Hello?
so I mean, yes, we have all the panelists actually agreeing that we need to perhaps revert to classroom learning. Just to point out a few things that this report has said, Mr. Gurumurthy, and since you mentioned it as well, about nutrition, about overall development being at risk, particularly girls never returning to school. So we are looking at a far bigger problem here. For a country like ours, this is not like any other. We cannot compare statistics in that sense, because our demography is very different. Do you think that is the reason why online education is not working? But then can we do something to make it happen? Because we do not know when this pandemic is actually going to get over. Even with all rules set in place, even if you bring the kids back to the classrooms, there will be marginal risks involved. I mean, we cannot shy away from that. Children are supposed to be asymptomatic carriers, and our adult vaccination is not complete yet, Mr. Gurumurthy.
Yeah, I think it's very useful to look at our own immediate history. In 2020 March, we had an unprecedented lockdown, which was probably no other country in the world had a lockdown where at 4 hours notice, we closed everything down. And that decision was taken at the central level. And that one decision, one size was supposed to fit every requirement of every village in the country. Now we know very clearly, I don't think anybody will agree with that kind of a methodology. All of us agree lockdowns are required, but more and more we are nuancing the lockdowns. We are having phased lockdown, phased unlockdown. You can see that in all the states, there is no question of complete lockdown. And secondly, another thing that's happening is decentralized decisions making is happening. For example, in Maharashtra itself, Bombay is a success case or Chennai is a success case because they managed to decentralize the decision of locking down and unlocking down to the lowest levels of decision making. The same logic has to apply to schools. Let me remind all of us and all the viewers that schools are in that March 2020 situation of complete closure. And just like the complete lockdown of March 2020 killed our economy, it made a huge impact on the economy. Nobody disagrees about it. The economy took a very terrible beating because of that decision of 4 months complete closure. And nobody, not even the central government, now wants to go back to a complete closure. We are very, very clear about that. But when it comes to schools, we are enforcing that same complete closure decision, not at all mindful of the fact that just like the complete closure killed the economy, the complete school closure is killing our children. How is it killing our children? Nutrition, you mentioned. The midday meal scheme of the government is a very important scheme for many poor families. And given the economic hardships of the lockdown, the food requirements are not being met in the family. So the midday meals is very crucial. Mental health issues are emerging because children are at home, they're not able to meet their friends. Apart from learning loss, apart from already what I mentioned and what you mentioned, early girl marriages are happening, and we are going to see enormous school dropout when we resume. So I think what is the flip side? Flip side is, yes, there are cases, children are carrier, but let us remember that the children from 80% of the families who are in the rural areas are anyway out in the community. It's not that they're not going to be kept at home, shut, and they're not carrying viruses already. So the decision making should be decentralized. Let the Gram Panchayat decide, let the school management committees decide, let the district and the Taluk Panchayat bodies decide. Let the central government or the state government not decide. Another important thing, school
Yes.
opening does not mean parents are compelled to send their children. We must understand that. So middle class has a fear that schools will open and their children will suffer. Middle class is welcome not to send their children to schools. I'm very concerned that the poor of this country, the socio-economically marginalized groups of this country, the Dalits, the Bahujans, the girls, minorities, they are hugely suffering from this decision of the government, which has no logical basis. When the cases are very low, when fatalities of children are almost it's in decimal points, when the harm is so negligible, the harm of closure is so high, I'm completely perplexed by the decision making that we will not open schools. Decentralized school open them tomorrow.
That's a
And
very
I completely
important
agree
point,
with
Mr. Gurmurthy. The cost benefit analysis, you are saying categorically that the harm is very negligible and the losses because of closure is huge at this
very
point,
high.
and it's only growing. And on that point, what I want to ask Kiran Tevtia is also that, what I find actually worrisome about this report is that it says that even students who are accessing education through digital means, it's actually impeding their progress. It uses, I'm not, in fact, I'm quoting them at verbatim here. The committee is of the view that online education is not a real education because it is only a transmission of contents, and the student is deprived of real learning and understanding of concepts, which of course is not a healthy method from what I can see, Ms. Daftia.
I understand, Afrida. See, I really don't think we should be seeing the situation as a binary kind of thing, right? The lines like online education is no education at all. I see a lot of children who are very excited about online education. They sit through it, they answer the teachers with all kudos to all the efforts that the teachers are making. They are learning. We can't completely say that they are not learning. But at the same time, I do get cases where parents are ghosting on behalf of children, especially in the secondary one. They are writing the papers on behalf of the child. I do get cases where children are using cheating notes. And also, of course, we all have to understand that this medium has helped the children wherever the accessibility was there to continue with the education instead of just creating a complete void. All right. So somewhere the business had to keep going. So that is where it helped them. And there are children who have learned from it. But however, we have to, whenever the school opens, the academicians would have to consider the academic gap, the learning gap, which is coming, and not think of that children has to catch up. They need to integrate this. That's my opinion. Of course, academicians are the best person who can reply to this, but then they should integrate it instead of making the child catch up with it. So that academic gap should be accounted for. But yes, I do not agree with it that it is no education at all. I do see a lot of children who are very excited about this mode, but yes, they do see the pain. Right, and they are trying to compensate by other ways. Like in some societies, it is allowed to go out, socialize with children. They do video call with their friends, so they are making best of whatever is there. But definitely, it has impacted. I have one concern here that just imagine even for the poor and low socioeconomy, or even in the families where the child may have very good internet connectivity, but you have to understand that for young children, how can you leave a child with internet-enabled devices without any supervision? There are parents, in fact, there was a study where I was seeing that
Yes,
families
absolutely.
where there was, yeah, Frida. So I've seen one study, I will just quote because that was
So these
important.
are the real pitfalls of online education. I think we have touched upon most of the points there. One quick last word from Priyanka Gulati. I want to ask you, ma'am, what do you propose? Now, how do you bring kids back to school? What will be the ideal way? From the discussion so far, we have understood that it cannot be a win-win. I mean, there is going to be some price to pay perhaps, but can the adults at home take responsibility, for instance, of protecting themselves? Because ultimately, all that we are discussing is to ensure that, in the end of it, the virus should not spread because of now schools opening, right? That would be the bottom line. How are we going to ensure that? Will the adults have to take more responsibility that they protect themselves from their own children? Should they be asymptomatic carriers? What other methods can we use to create an enabling and a safe environment? Perhaps if each one does their part, the parent, the student, the school, we can make this happen, Ms. Gulati.
Yeah, very right. Basically, you see, what we are doing at the moment is we have generated a Google form where we are asking parents whether they are vaccinated or not. How many members are there in a family? All the adult members of the family, are they vaccinated or they are not vaccinated? First step is that. Second, we are seeing that our whole staff, from class D to teachers to each and every staff member of the school is very well vaccinated. See, we have to understand that we have to call students back to school. At least we have to begin that. Because if they're not coming, there is going to be huge learning gap. There's going to be socio-cognitive behavior is going to change of whole society. We have to create a vibrant future citizens, isn't it? And they have to come back to school. So steps we can take is, school is already, I think all the schools in metros at least are taking a very great step. We opened in the month of February, and it was a success. It was a huge success. We could manage, we were monitoring students, but they have to get back to school. I personally feel that.
Absolutely. All right, so we are unanimous in that. One needs to think of ways and means how to get the kids back to the classroom. We cannot wait for the vaccination process of the adults to be completed, because then again, to talk about the kids getting vaccinated, it's going to be a very long drawn process. Schools opening cannot wait for that. That's number one. And of course, it has to be a very studied approach in terms of enabling a safe environment. That is the bottom line. So all stakeholders, whether it's the school, whether it's the teacher, the student and the parents at home, will have to do their bit to create that safe environment. There is no other way. We cannot have schools closed indefinitely in this country. The losses, as we discussed, are huge for doing that. Thank you so much for joining us, Kiran Teftia, Gurumurthy Kasinathan and Priyanka Gulati for joining us this evening.